Welcome to the Trailhead from UltraSignup, where big adventures begin. Trail running is so much more than just a sport. It's a community, a culture, a way of seeing the world. On this show, we're not dissecting splits or debating shoe specs. We're here to get to the heart of it all, the people, the places, and the stories that speak to the soul of the sport. Join me, Zoe Rome, and my co-host, Brendan Leonard, as we'll bring you conversations with the everyday athletes, local legends, quirky characters, and creative minds who make trail running what it is. Messy, joyful, gritty, and deeply human. Because it's not just about chasing finish lines. It's about the friendships forged on long climbs, the lessons learned in the pain cave, and the weird, wild moments that remind us why this sport is about so much more than the miles. Hi, Sabrina. So you are a philosopher that runs, like your actual job is philosopher, I believe. How did you become a philosopher, and how does that intersect with running? I know those are two huge questions to start with, but let's get into it.
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, my family, sometimes they just tell people I'm a psychologist because it's easier to explain than a philosopher, because who's a philosopher in 2025? Yeah, so I mean, what is a philosopher? You just ask a lot of big questions. So I feel like we're keepers of texts, really. So Plato and Aristotle and have this kind of tradition of inquiry, of asking these questions throughout thousands of years about what it means to be human. So I discovered philosophy kind of through liberal arts requirements in undergrad. And at first I hated it because I didn't like that you had to ask questions, but then there weren't always satisfying answers and we would just move on to the next question. But eventually I really liked the books that we were reading. I liked that it's a mix of being like analytical, but also wondering about things. So I kept coming back and ended up majoring. What do you do with a philosophy degree? It's a great question. I just kept studying philosophy until my options winnowed down to being a philosophy professor or jumping off into some other career field. So that's where I am. That's what I'm doing. And my areas of interest are mostly like ethics. So I do character development, virtues, vices. What does it mean to have a good life? Those kinds of things. And it's a pretty good complement to being a runner, I think, because when you're out there alone, like that's what you're thinking about. And if you've read a lot of people asking similar types of questions, it's you're engaging with other people who've asked those things, and it kind of feels less alone.
For sure. And I feel like, ethics feels like a pretty resonant and immediately applicable field of philosophy beyond just, maybe there's some fields that feel maybe less immediately relevant to today, but I feel like that's stuff that we're all grappling with pretty immediately. How do you see those questions like playing out in your life, or like where does your sort of field of study start to feel like it really intersects with being a person in the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with my students and they were saying, I don't know, something to the effect of like ethics only comes up in these big decisive moments. Like you have to choose to do one thing rather than the other, and I don't know, some sort of dilemma. And I was like, okay, sit down. Everybody write what you did in the first 2 hours this morning before like waking up and coming to class. So they wrote about, and I was like, write it in detail. So they write about their breakfast and like walking to class or whether they drove or whatever. Um, and then I pointed out to them that like every single thing they had done that morning involved ethics, right? So how they cared for their bodies, if they went to the gym, if they like fed themselves well, if they, how did they walk past people at campus? Did they make eye contact? Did they open the door for anyone? Like the kind of character is just through and through who you are. It's how you occupy the world and how you interact with each other. And so it's not these like big decisive moments. It's about kind of consistently acting well and having integrity in small things, being honest with yourself, things like that. So I see ethics everywhere. Maybe it's like when you have a hammer, everything's a nail, but like I think like having a virtue and vice vocabulary, it's like being given spectacles. So you have all these words that help you to see your frailties and the ways that you can improve, but also things that you've grown with respect to. So yeah, it's like having a grammar for seeing the world in different ways.
And you're also a writer. You write a column for I Run Far in addition to writing a book in this arena. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing and how you decide what to write about and like what questions or ideas feel really interesting for you?
Yeah. I mean, for a long time, I resisted doing anything philosophical pertaining to running just because I like to have those spheres just on their own. Like, I didn't want to be reflecting on my running. Like, running was just the thing that I was enjoying and was a break from work. And so I resisted that for a long time. But I just started to see like ways in which occupying the sport was not morally neutral. And I was bothered by the fact that oftentimes when we talk about athletics and ethics, it's like it only comes up when someone's done something terrible. Like they've taken drugs or they've cut a course, and we have like a very vivid negative imagination for ethics and athletics, that kind of relationship. But there are also like virtues that can enrich your relationship with running, and I wanted to like feed into that imaginative space a little bit more and talk about like ways that we can grow as athletes with respect to our character, how we can build richer communities, and yeah, so I started writing about that more. Megan Hicks of I Run Far asked if I wanted to start writing for I Run Far, like formally in 2018. And since then, I've been doing that, and it's just so fun. And also, I feel when you're an academic, most of your work is read by like four people. And you work so hard, and then you hope those four people are paying attention. But getting to write more publicly has it's like enriched my scholarship because I realized what questions are interesting, but it's also fun be to be part of like the community in a different way, especially because since 2020, like, so I'm pregnant with my third child. So like I feel
Wow.
like my legs are not like doing so much work in running right now, but at least like I can be present in another way.
Yeah, lots of other things
Congrats.
doing work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thanks.
I kind of have a question about your writing, if you don't mind me jumping in, Zoe.
Get in there. Yeah.
So like you said, as an academic, your stuff is read by like four people, and I imagine there's quite different language. How is it difficult for you to, I guess, dumb it down? Not quite the right word, but for a public audience that's not, you know, into ethics and philosophy. And sub question, which relates to you have two children. Do you have do you have an easier time or a hard time trying to impart these ethical things onto very young kids? Because my wife and I are, trying to talk to our toddler now, and I'm like, not a lot of multisyllable words. He doesn't have a lot of multisyllable words.
Yeah. At what stage do you introduce Plato?
Yes. Right. Like, so I guess like first part of that, is that an enjoyable thing for you to say like, okay, well, how would I write this for normal people? So I feel like the book is very accessible. Honestly, I'm like, for me, I'm like, oh, this is a lot of stuff I think about, but like smarter, but by written by a smart person. But yeah.
Well, thanks. I mean, so when I first started doing public writing, it was really hard to find the right voice or know where to pitch it. And so most of the time I would send drafts of things to my younger brother, who's like a very smart guy and not a philosopher. And he would tell me if it was too esoteric, and I um, would just like soften things. And also one thing that philosophers do is we overly scaffold. It's like everything is definition, then you like move on to the next premise kind of thing. And he would call me out for that, so that was really helpful. But now, like, because I've been teaching for a number of years, that's something that's really helped with my public writing, just because I think, how would I say this to a first year? How would I explain the concept? And so writing the book, I was pitching it at how I would explain things to my students. In terms of teaching things to my children, I'd say like sometimes I have so much theoretical clarity when I'm writing, and then I talk to my children and I am losing my marbles. So it doesn't always translate well. And like anytime I thought I had acquired some sort of insight into how children actually behave, with my first child, my second child is not the same. So they respond to praise and blame differently. They respond to time out differently. For one, it's insufferable, and for the other, she'll forget she's in there and occupy her time. And so, like, if there's anything that parenting has taught me, it's like having greater humility for my knowledge base, and to just like be sensitive to the ways in which people are crazy. And it's really wild to think that we all start this way as these little like chaotic tyrant people who are amazing, but also just like doing their own thing, you know?
My wife is, well, we were just talking about, she's a writer too, and she was like talking about, I said, this is a story idea, you need to write this. But it was like, are you in a cult, or are you just a parent of a toddler? It's just like all these things, like, we're dancing now, and you're like, okay, we'll dance, you know, and like all this nonsensical stuff, and like the gaslighting of like, did you poop? No. You sure? Like, oh, okay, so we're in his cult, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, toddler
Yeah,
or
for
charismatic cult leader.
For sure. Yeah, and like I don't know if you thought of this, or this is maybe insulting or a compliment, but I was thinking of your book is sort of too running as something like shop class as Soulcraft is.
I love that book.
Okay, yeah, and that book I thought I liked it too, but at times I was like, okay, but this is a little too far into the academic weeds, you know, for me. And like it was kind of a chore to read. And as I'm reading your book, I feel like it's so much more accessible, and like it's like I can actually wash dishes while reading it and not have to be like, wait, and like rewinding and like, okay. So I don't know if it'll be as you know, successful as far as it being a New York Times bestseller or whatever, but I thought it was kind of a similar thing, but using running, which I am so much more into than I think we'll see, like building custom motorcycles, you know, and like, so yeah, I'm loving it.
Well, thanks so much.
Could always be getting into the motorcycles later. It's never
time.
Too early to midlife crisis.
You're right. Yeah. I feel like the running is going to be less expensive. Yeah. Along the lines of what you were saying before, I have a quote I was going to read from your book that I think I got this right, but as far as like professional ethics overlapping with running or informing your running, one of the things early on in the book you wrote was, moral virtues develop as habits do, by repeated practice, ellipses. We develop good character in the same way we become better runners. We practice. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's so funny. Like sometimes when I'm talking to my students, they just take for granted that who they are is just who they are. Like if they have a really low appetite for reading difficult things, for example, they're just like, that's just my attention span. This is just who I am for life. And I like athletics because it demonstrates a kind of practice-based approach of like bridging the gap between who you are today and then who you want to be like later. And I tell them, like, in the same way that you wouldn't enter a gym and try to pick up the biggest weight on day one, you try to like practice your way there. And then that kind of consistency and repetition can result in like having productive change. And so, yeah, it's really neat that Aristotle describes virtue formation in that way, as like the small activities you do repeatedly that kind of yield their fruit later in time, because that makes sense to me as an athlete. It makes sense that I would walk myself there slowly. So yeah, and it takes the guesswork out. Like, how do you become a more just person? Well, you do that first just action, and it's going to be awkward. And then you repeatedly do that until you can do it in a more stable way with a kind of ease and automaticity, in the same way that you learn how to ride a bike or learn how to run.
Yeah, sort of forget the noun, will become the noun by doing the verb.
Yeah.
That sort of makes sense. I forget who said that.
We are who we pretend to be, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I feel like this kind of brings me back to that first point you brought up with prompting your students to notice like all of the the myriad ways throughout the day where we actually are being just or ethical actors, how do you train yourself, or how do you encourage other people to train themselves to start paying attention to those sort of micro decisions that make up who we are? Because I feel like, I mean, my inclination is that that first step is to start to pay attention to those junctures. And then when you are actually aware of all of the moments in which you're an ethical actor, that's when you can actually start to do that, make those different choices, when you start to bring more attention to it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually in the literature is called the problem of beginnings. Like, how do you get someone to care such that they will take that first action and then enter the process of becoming better in a certain respect? And there are a number of different answers that are given. I mean, one is like sometimes if you see someone you admire, you're like, wow, like your admiration guides you to realize there's a character gap between you and that person. And so then you start like trying to become better, in that respect. Another is sometimes like shame or guilt, like someone calls you out on something and you realize like, wow, that is me. Or like you have moments when you're reading some book, moments of like recognition of yourself. So yeah, and then there are like habitual ways in which on an annual basis, every January 1st, we're like self-assessing as though we've never done it before. Like, I will improve in this way or something. And if it's like a real, I don't know, like some of them work and some of them don't. But I mean, for me, the biggest thing is just like having people I admire around me and like seeing how they live and kind of like leaning more in that direction, because it's like, it's a way of being chastised, but also like continually being reminded, like seeing someone who's excellent and then trying to move further in that direction.
Yeah, you said this multiple times in the book too, which you just said, but like when we think of ethics, we often think of it in a negative consequence, or a negative happening. Someone cheated, or someone took performance enhancing drugs. And through that lens, it's always the people, competing at a high level. Are there examples, like off the top of your head, of ethical choices or dilemmas that the rest of us have, the people who are not in the top 10% of, say, a race? Can you think of any that come to mind?
Yeah, that's so funny because I think like, I don't know, probably a lot of people learn about the norms of doping and what's acceptable and what's not through these highly publicized cases. Like, I think there's sort of like a lack of literacy. Like, if you're not held accountable to it, you're not going to be blood tested ever. Like, how would you even know that taking some illicit substance that all of the influencer bros are saying is good is actually a problem? So I don't know, like I think in those cases, yes, like probably it gets the upper echelon of runners shaking in their boots more so, but I think it provides like a lens of seeing like, oh, what actually are the rules in our sport? Am I like living in terms of them? But I mean, so most people cheat. And I don't mean that in like, I'm currently reading whatever that book is, Lance Armstrong's former training partner. Like they were like taking blood bags and EPO, and it's really insane. I don't think most people are cheating on that level, but the little ways in which we occupy the sport, I think we hedge a little, and it's called the puzzle of limited cheating. So there's empirical work to suggest that when you're given leeway, in most cases, people aren't cheating like in bold-faced ways, but they are hedging in little ways that they can explain away to themselves. So, for example, if you take a test and all of the answers are like some of them are unsolvable, some of them are extremely difficult, and say originally you would have scored like a 4 out of 20. Well, if you are told that you get to put it through a shredder at the end instead of like presenting it to the experimenters, most people will hedge upward a little bit and they'll report that they had like 7 correct, which is just a little bit of like pushing it such that you can explain it away. And it's because we care about our own self-conception. So we don't want to be liars to ourselves. So it's not even necessarily like not wanting to be seen by others, but I'm sure there's like a certain amount of hedging that happens. Like people cut courses, but just a little bit, or people, fudge numbers on the the data they're recording, things like that. I think we all have these little press secretaries in our hearts, and we do the bad thing, and try to explain them away. So I think I don't think this is just an elite incentive problem. Like, I think this is just who we are as humans. And so having like accountability, having clear rules, I think it benefits everybody.
Yeah, right. Like, when you're smuggling like bags of blood in a dog bed across the Spanish border, like that's when you're like, okay, this is not good. But it's with those other things where it's like, well, like this supplement or like, whatever, like random, like the really small things where it's like, well, this hasn't been, it's not necessarily banned under WADA, but kind of falls into that category of like a gray zone type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's probably easier now that we have so many gray area interventions, things like, well, everybody's taking bicarb, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they're totally fine, right? But it's probably easier to like form an explanatory bridge between that and some other illicit thing than it was before, when it was like, well, we're just out there on Sour Patch Kids. Like, it's like harder to explain away like hedging in terms of drugs when it's like nothing, all or nothing kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
This is funny. So I think of my last race, I was like, there was a little switchback that was like, there's a path, the social path that like you could have cut. It wouldn't have saved you more than a second. And I was like, why are we even doing the switchback? And I was in a pack of mid-pack runners, and I was like, well, I'm not doing it. I'm gonna stay on the course, and no one else cut it either. And I thought, why did we all do that? Why did we all just like, we're all just honest?
Right.
And now you're saying everybody cheats, and I'm like, do I not care enough to cheat?
Yeah.
Should I try harder? I don't know.
I think that idea of like, having that like construction like of our own identity around like, I'm a good person, therefore the things I do are the things a good person does, and therefore not cheating. I'm curious how you see that like identity formation play out in athletics. Like, how do you see people building their self-concept as runners through those actions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it probably precedes athletics.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, like again, we're like returning to, I have small children in my house. Like, my daughter at the end of every day is like, was I a good girl today? And wants to know like in black and white terms. And if I say like, well, yeah, you did great today, there was like that little issue you had with your sister, whatever, it's like she wants to like take that off the table, like explain it away. Like, I think we just like morally, it's easier to have a story of I'm all good or I'm all bad. If you look at the stories that we tell, like on Disney, it's like there are the good guys, there are the bad guys, that kind of neat and tidy story. If you walk through the kind of biographies of our key leaders, it's like, well, you can look at the cover, and if he has like an eagle in the background, it's like, oh, this guy is the hero. And then like, these are the bad guys, this is the bad guy section. I think like it's a lot easier to have that sort of, I'm on the right team, I'm the good person, and then explain away the bad. There's one thing, it's called the fundamental attribution error. We tend to attribute to other people traits on the basis of their bad actions. But for ourselves, we tend to look at situational things. So you took a pencil because you're a thief. I took a pencil because I had a very busy morning and I needed to get here on time and care about, like, I have to like get some stuff written down. And so like, we just have this kind of double-mindedness. We norm differentiate, we set different standards for ourselves. And I think it's like part of like the very naive narrative telling that we have in our culture around like the good and the bad or something.
Yeah, I mean, that always reminds me of like having to read getting to read the David Foster Wallace like This Is Water essay about having to consistently keep your eye trained on the like you said, the reluctance to assign care. Like, I'm driving like an asshole because I'm in a rush. You're driving like an asshole because that is who you fundamentally are as
because
a person.
you are an asshole, obviously.
Yes. We are different. I am busy. You're a bad person. Yeah. I'm curious how you think like maybe athletics or running can help people like better and it like think through these things. Like, do you think that athletics can be sort of like a like a little like a microcosm for exploring these questions? Because like it's scary to me to think about like, am I a good person in the context of like my life overall? I can't imagine having you as a mom and asking if I'm a good girl and having you be like, well, what is goodness?
Yeah.
Mom's been working on this for a couple decades.
Yeah.
So
That's a big question, honey. So,
Yeah.
but it feels like a lot of like things that are maybe hard or scary to explore in the context of life are much easier, or like easier to explore in the context of ethics, right? Like where it's hard for me to think about ethics in terms of like my environmental impact or like what I'm doing at work or like my role as a consumer, as a human on earth. It shrinking it down to the like the little snow globe of running feels a lot easier to wrap my head around. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think running, I mean, you can use it as a laboratory for virtue, right? Like you can use it to work on like refining your vision with respect to yourself. And I think that that is part of trading. Like you need a kind of honesty about yourself and knowing where your limits really are, right? Like having hubris, the sort of outside sense of what you're capable of, for example, is going to be a deficiency as an athlete. It's going to make you hit the wall. And yes, so there are certain kinds of like honesty that training affords you, like hitting your limits on a regular basis and watch yourself fold. There's a kind of practice in who you are when you have heightened emotions, for example, like can you down regulate those emotions and act rationally? Because there are going to be situations outside of sport where you are like going to have heightened emotions. I mean, in like traffic or something, or at the Thanksgiving table when someone tells you, why do people need to read Latin? And you're going to be like, so mad.
that comes up at most people's Thanksgiving dinner, I gotta say.
We're constantly debating the merits of learning dead languages.
Uncle Frank, do not talk about Latin. Just do not mention Latin around him. He will blow up.
So
Yeah,
I was
this
recently
is purely
in
hypothetical.
I was recently in Italy and delighted to see that all the ATMs in the Vatican have Latin as an option.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I took
Wow.
1 year of Latin in high school. I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to withdraw money in Latin. And I did not have the specific vocabulary.
Oh no. Oh man. Yeah. So I think like, yeah, running can be that. But then I also think, yeah, so there are certain ways in which having self-honesty with respect to your character can be valuable as an athlete. It can enhance your performance. But I also think running can equally be a space where you dull your sensibilities with respect to yourself. Like if you are continually practicing explaining away your frailties and making excuses for everything that goes wrong and it's like doesn't pertain to anything within your control, or if you are like just not caring about the community in running and putting yourself first, like all of these kinds of things are ways in which you can become a worse person that may show up in the rest of your life.
I'm curious about that community aspect. Like, what are the ways that you think how do you see that playing out in the community in terms of people potentially? I think we all show up, or I show up to this community with every best intention of being like a positive, ethical actor, but also I'm a human who's still gonna human.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think some of it is like, do you contribute to the community? And um, we have so many amazing exemplars like in our sport of people who do that really well. Like when you see Courtney on the side of races, for example, I think that does so much for defining the sport and what the norms are, things like that. So the kind of culture of crewing, the kind of culture of like pacing and just supporting runners, even if you yourself are not racing, I think that's something that's great and can translate over like into the rest of your life in win some ways. I do worry about, sometimes I worry about the kind of outsized bravado toward accomplishments. And I do want to specify it's like bravado, right? Because having like an adequate knowledge of what you're capable of when you are indeed capable of those things, there is nothing wrong about that. That's just honesty. And there's a kind of like well-ordered striving that is great and important and can call people to a higher standard. But when you fix your value on yourself as therefore more important than other people, I think that is it's a distortion of your vision, right? Because you are not, even if you're the fastest person on the planet, you do not have more value than someone else. And it's a way in which you're not celebrating other people. And that is like that's a way that it's a kind of theft, right? Because if you can only celebrate yourself, and then when anyone else excels, like you don't give them their flowers or whatever, you don't like give them praise or celebrate that they've done good work too. It's like not permitting them to have their moment. And so I think we have a lot of occasion to evaluate our responses to other people's excellences. And like, is it really hard to celebrate other people when they have success? Sure, but that's something that you can practice doing better in the sport, and it doesn't take away from your own striving or anything like that.
Yeah, throughout your book, I should mention the name of your book, The Examined Run, Why Good People Make Better Runners. There's a few references to other sports, when you're comparing them to running or whatever, and saying, well, in this case, the sport is more, people do more of this action, so it leads more to this. The subtitle of the book is Why Good People Make Better Runners. I'm like thinking, do runners make better people? Do you think the fact that we're able to do it far into adulthood, like there are people still running ultra marathons and trail races at the age in their 70s, whereas most of us can only play football until age 18, a few people can go to like age 22, but do you think there's something to that, like the longevity of the practice of it, that we're able to keep trying to get better in some way throughout our lives?
Yeah, and I should say two things. One, I did not pick the subtitle of my book. One thing you should know about the
Is that not you? Are you not on? Is that not you on the cover either?
Shade at editors.
That's not even me on the cover. It's somebody, but they have very good form, so I was like, that's great. But yeah, no, like how it works is you propose like the title through OUP, Oxford University Press, and so I said, please, The Examined Run. And then they came up with something they thought would be provocative, which like it's provocative even to me. Like it makes me a little unsettled, like to think in those like terms of like someone, performing is like as wholly aligning with good character, because I think there are many instances of people who have terrible characters and are high performers. So I have to say that. But then two, I think if there are sports that you can inhabit for a long period of time, like I never want to take that for granted, because like I'm in my 30s now. In my 40s, maybe running won't be around. Like I don't want to take for granted that I'll have it for my life, but it is it's a sport that you have the opportunity to walk through. Many of us do have the opportunity to walk through from youth through like when your performances increase and then when they come back down. And that can be like a really valuable space to just like continually being humbled, but also reckoning with the aging process before maybe non-running peers do, and seeing ways in which you grow and seeing ways in which you aren't growing. Like it's a very honest space for self-assessment on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think about the rest of our culture being obsessed with winning and losing too, and it's like team sports. Usually it's a pretty black and white, who won, who lost, and like even fans will be going out of the football stadium being like, yeah, we beat you, blah, 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 or whatever. But most of us who are running, like we're participating. Yeah, we're all losers, there's like, you show up at like the starting line, there's like 300 people, like maybe 20 of them have a chance to win. The rest of us are a bunch of losers. And
it's like degradations of not winning, which I'm not ready to say that the opposite of not winning is losing, but it is also degradations of gradations of not winning.
Yeah, like is there built-in humility in some way from that, I think.
Yeah. Just having to reckon with that every time you give it your best and are not the best. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, if it is a laboratory, it's potentially just a sport that gives us more time and opportunity to be fiddling in the lab.
Yeah.
Yeah, or thinking, like as opposed to like an offensive lineman in the NFL is probably not getting down a 3-point stance and being like, is this really what I want to do? Yes, what is goodness? Am I a good person? What is the ethical thing to do? There's a story. There's a story in the book where you talk about coaching cross country, and forgive me if I get a couple of details wrong, but it's one of your runners. You know, you're hoping to, I think, win the state championship or at least place high in the state championship, and one of the runners, someone from another team, falls like in the finishing chute, and she bends down to help this person up. And as they're slowing down to help the person up, multiple people pass, and then that runner on your team becomes a non-scoring runner. You lose the state championship, and you have a moment where you think, well, how do I react to this? Because I'm well, can you take it from there actually and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, good times. I want to clarify that I am not on like a higher moral plane. I mean, moral philosophers are different than like to be a moral philosopher does not mean that you have well-ordered desires necessarily. It just means you can talk about them. Um,
I'm not
so-
better. I just have a bigger and more specific vocabulary.
Which I should say
about the
that's
ways in
covered.
which I failed.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
covered early in the book too, when you reference, I think it was cheeseburger ethicist. Is that the
Yeah.
term? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
the idea of that is like they studied moral philosophers, the actions of moral philosophers, and on every index that they studied, like whether or not they called their moms or answered their students' emails, returned their library books, they were no better than the rest of the population. So I just want to clarify that when I tell this
incredible
story.
disclaimer. It's so great. Love
Yeah.
it.
So my team, we were set to finish on the podium. And in Texas, there's still this anti-Good Samaritan rule on the cross-country course. So if you assist another runner, that means you're disqualified. So we lost. She wasn't a scoring person anymore, and we were off the podium. So, I mean, in the moment, I wanted to be devastated, and I like honestly felt it, and I felt for the rest of the team because they were sad too. But it was also like that whole season I talked to them about how we were building character and like we were going to, grow in joy and grow in courage and all these other things. And then that decisive moment where she showed character and was not even like she wasn't all in on performance. She saw someone in need of help and like her immediate impulse was to respond. That was like a great moral victory. And so sometimes like what the good action is and what's going to yield the best performance are going to pull apart. As a coach, it was like, okay, well, how I respond to this moment is going to tell them way more about what is important to me than anything I could just tell them in terms of words. So I had to gather myself. But there are certainly moments in which like you feel the pull because it's like you're submitted to this discipline, you want to excel, and also you're like you care, right? Like you put a lot of time and attention into excelling in the sport, and sometimes sometimes you have to know like where the priority lies in those situations.
I think that's so I feel like I don't know, like I feel like so often in like the world of like running media and like the fitness sort of weird space that I inhabit, there's oftentimes this sort of like self-helpification of philosophy and like sort of like trying to distill it down, not from this place of like I am not like a higher order moral. It's more like I know all the things, I have the answers because I took philosophy 101 and I googled stoicism, and here are bullet points I have distilled into a TikTok, Instagram post, and or 90-page PDF for you to buy on my website. And I feel like your book sort of pushes or like offers a different way of like thinking about things in an athletic context. And I guess I'm just curious, like where would you want, at the risk of trying to do the same thing and being like, here are 3 ways to be a better moral actor according to Sabrina Little, like and subscribe.
Have you thought about turning the book into like 400 TikToks? I mean,
oh my gosh.
But I'm curious, like, what would maybe be a framework you could offer runners specifically to examine more, right? Like maybe not even putting the burden of like, be a better person, be a better runner. Like what would maybe just be like a different way of paying attention or of thinking more deeply going forward be?
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of what we get from the influencer culture is like this sort of pithy slogan sort of situation, like the no pain, no gain. Pain is weakness, leaving the body, whatever. Suffer, all suffering is good, whatever. And I think just if I would encourage people to do anything, it would be to like examine in a more like ask questions about these things, like not just accept them. And I think having conversations in the context of community, like talking to your running partners about like, what are your goals? What are your intentions? Like, because I find this with runners. I also find it with my students. Like sometimes they're just like on an achievement escalator to nowhere, and they don't like have some sort of vision of where they're going at the end of things. So like they're signed up for business school because of the money, which is like great and, you know, answers necessity of the human condition. But also like money is not an end in itself. It's a means to some sort of life on the other side of it. And they've not asked that question. And so if there's anything I would encourage people to do, it's like to take seriously the human questions of who are you? What are you doing here? Like, and then what role does running play in that process? Because it could just be you're looking back at all the years of running. And I had this kind of experience to some effect of like, wait, what was it all for? Like I worked really hard on these specific races and my attention was so winnowed down and presentist that I didn't necessarily, it didn't have like this kind of broad coherence with like the things that I take as being valuable, things like that, which is a very dissatisfying way to look back on something you've invested a lot of time into.
What am I doing with all these bags of blood that I'm going to put back in my, you know, like, why am I taking all these drugs? Yeah.
What with the EPO? Yeah, I'm going to try to not reflect too much on how often runners keep getting compared to either your toddler and or freshman philosophy students, because
Sorry,
it is a good comp. That's what hurts, is that it makes a lot of sense.
The achievement escalator to nowhere is that's a pretty great phrase. I'm going to have to write that down.
Yeah, I feel like that, and I frequently come back to the hedonic treadmill because
yes.
that I feel like that's a one that hits home for me.
Yeah.
Well, those are all the questions I had for you, Sabrina. Brendan, did you have anything you want to ask Sabrina before we wrap up?
Yeah, I could keep going. I also have one off the record question I want to ask you after we stop recording. That's not in the purview of this podcast, but throughout the book, I'm like, and I've seen this in your other writing too, that you're definitely funny, right?
thanks.
One of my favorite quotes is, this is very early on in the book. You say, fitness is feeling like you are dying at a much faster pace than you used to feel you were dying at. Like, which I think is a wonderful way to describe. It's like that, what's the saying? It never gets easier. You just get faster.
Yeah.
As far as running goes. Were there jokes taken out of the book in the editing process?
Yeah.
And was there a specific one where you were like, don't take that one? Why?
There were definitely jokes taken out. At the beginning of the writing process, he would like explain why, like, no, you don't need that joke there. But then later on, he would just write ... in the margin and like delete it, which is like well placed. Yeah, like I said, like one of them was like, I was writing about role ... and I said role models not to be confused with an attractive piece of bread. And he would just wrote ... deleted it right out, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, I mean, if you're not enjoying,
I don't know about
like,
that. Yeah.
the writing process.
Yeah, you've got to have some darlings worth killing, or you're just not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
I always feel like people aren't going to notice if you don't. I've done this in film projects too, where they're like, here's our notes, and there's like 500 things, and I'm like, I'll probably just do about half of these. You're not going to watch the whole thing again. You won't
Reject
know.
suggestion.
Yeah,
if this can survive one round of edits, it can survive
sneak it
them
back
all.
in. Yeah. No, that's good. There's all sorts of things. I could just read some of the things I wrote down. When we are sad, we perceive hills to be steeper. That was the thing. I was like, yeah, of course we do, or sometimes when hills are steeper, we become sad too, I think. Resilience and humor are the carbon-plated shoes of the soul. We cannot buy them, but we can develop them.
They will make you 4% faster.
I mean, there's a whole section on humor and how it's a performance-enhancing virtue, and I thought that was wonderful. And I'm like, I wonder how many people actually think this. Besides the three of us on this call.
I actually am interested in that, because you do so often talk about how many of these things are trainable, right? Like, is humor trainable, and what does that look like in an athletic context? Like, how do you asking for not a comedian. How do you become funnier?
Oh man, if I knew. Yeah, no, I did write an article on how to educate the virtue of humor. And it's like a really difficult process, like, especially because, I mean, if you think about early education, for example, like anytime a child makes an awkward joke, you want to shut that down, right? But having that practice, like, okay, because virtues are acquired by practice, like having that sort of like space to like err toward buffoonery, right? Like humor is positioned between boorishness and buffoonery, and you have to like err in the direction of buffoonery in order to develop greater sense of like comfort and humor. It's a very difficult virtue to develop because it relies a lot on your practical wisdom, and not a lot of people have that, right? Like your ability to read social cues. And so when I talk about humor, I mean, there are two broad ways you can think about it. You can think about like the social virtue of humor, which is something that honestly, I'm not confident many like people necessarily get there. But there is this kind of, there's a species of humor that's called blithe humility, which is taking yourself lightly. And I think that is something that can be practiced. So blithe humility, like the ability to look at your defects, your incongruities, the ways in which you fall short, and then meet it with levity. Like, I think that is something you can work on, but it's going to require that you have something to lean into, right? So, like, what is the thing that's going to disemburden you of having to bear the fact that you fell short yet again? And so is it like a robust sense of community? Like, do you have really good friends who are going to love you no matter what? Is it this sort of recognition that this sport is actually absurd and you voluntarily entered into it? Just like having that sort of vision of like what it is that makes it okay. And then when you are in that difficult time, being able to look at it and be like, yeah, I messed up again. And yet this positive thing, having that sort of buoy to keep you up, I think is really valuable.
In lieu of those sort of like dumb gym poster aphorisms mentioned earlier, I would like to commission some Sabrina Little branded posters that say this sport is absurd and you voluntarily submitted to it.
Yeah.
Everything is absurd, though. I mean, really, that we're doing. So it's no more absurd than, at least it doesn't hurt people, I guess.
It's true. It's a contained pain.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of humor as more like a thing you practice, and like it's trial and error. And when you say you want to keep a child from making an awkward joke, I'm always like, well, that might have an audience somewhere. Maybe this is just not the right audience, and you want them to like not have jokes that are like, you don't want the audience to be like Nazis, like, well, that's you want it to be people they like and want them to like. But yeah, it's you got to workshop stuff, and it takes a lot of awkwardness to get there. So that's a much more simpler. But yeah, would you say that what you were just describing was like, are we talking about self-deprecation, or is that slightly different from what you're describing?
Yeah, so self-deprecation is like, so I see that as like or it's defined in the virtue theory literature as a deficiency of humility. So it's actually underselling your abilities. And so it's a distorted vision of self. Whereas I think with humorists, it's like the reason that it's funny is because it's true. So having this kind of like honest recognition of self accompanied by some like buoying belief that things are okay because of X, that's the goal.
Okay, got it. That's good. Okay, great. Yeah.
I like that. I think that's a powerful way to think about it. That still sort of, again, as a comedian, allows you to retain agency over the thing rather than like continually positioning yourself in like inaccurately in a power structure.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think like will always ring pretty hollow to audiences.
Yeah, we should let you go. This has been fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for allowing us to workshop comedy and experiment with humor on you. And thank you so much for this amazing philosophical conversation. We will link to the book in the show notes and also to your column on I Run Far.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Can I ask one more question before we can like stop
Yeah.
recording?
Yeah.